Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's chat. My name is Tara, and I'm a team member here at Understood. Today, we're going to be talking about time management, organization, and attention, and we are so excited to have Kristin Carothers, PhD, joining us for today's chat. Hi, Kristin. How are you?
Hi, Tara. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Kristin, would you like to take a moment just to briefly introduce yourself to the folks joining us?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Dr. Kristen Carothers. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist who specializes in treating children, adolescents, and adults, especially those who deal with issues of attention or executive function. I work exclusively with parents and teachers around school consultation and teaching a model called behavioral parent management training, which is an evidence-based approach to address behaviors associated with disruptive behavior and inattention. I'm physically located in Atlanta, and I split my time between Atlanta and New York, and I'm a part of a practice called Peachtree Integrated Psychology here in Atlanta.
Thank you so much. I do want to remind the folks joining us that we will be taking parent questions today. We'll try to get to as many as we can during the chat. If you have a question, please feel free to type it in the chat box located at the bottom corner of your screen. And it usually is helpful if you can include your child's age so that you can receive a more targeted response. So let's get started. My first question for you, Kristin, is why do some kids have trouble with organization and time management?
Okay, so when we think about individual differences in organization and time management, I think it's really important to think about kids having their own personalities, having their own styles, and differences in strengths and weaknesses. So some children may be highly verbal, but struggle to structure themselves or to stay on task. Other children may be less verbal, but do well with organizational skills. And so if we think of organizational skills as a set of tasks that make up a child's entire character or personality, rather than looking at them in isolation as necessarily problematic, I think it's really helpful. So we want to just think of organizational skills, inattention, being easily distracted as just a subset of behaviors that could occur within any child. Okay, so we all have strengths and weaknesses. Some kids may struggle with organizational skills because for them they may not have been in an environment that was highly structured, or it could be that they have not become accustomed to routines, or that it's not easy for them to internalize those structures or routines, and they need a lot of feedback from their environment to help them build skills. So when I mention strengths and weaknesses, there are some people who naturally are motivated to be structured and organized in that way, and there are others who are less motivated by structures and routines, and so we build external resources to help them with those things.
Got it. And now these skills is it true that they're often referred to as executive function skills? Is that correct?
Yeah. So sometimes executive functioning refers to a broader number of skills,
Okay.
of which being able to organize yourself, being able to plan, being able to filter out important versus unimportant information, and being able to focus and concentrate. Those are all part of what we would call executive function. So the Harvard Center for the Developing Child has a really nice way of describing executive functions. And I think I spoke about this last time I was with you guys. They think about executive functioning skills as like the air traffic control center of the brain. So our frontal lobe, the front part of our brain, is basically our air traffic control center. So for children, adolescents, and adults, every day we're filtering various messages. We've got planes coming in, we've got planes taking off, we've got planes landing, we've got planes waiting on the runway. Those planes would be our thoughts, our impulses, our decision-making skills, and our planes have a destination, okay? And sometimes we may have difficulty getting to our destination if we're unable to plan, organize, structure ourselves, and filter out unwanted noise, okay? It might also be hard for us if we're not able to plan ahead for what might come, and to have optional plans for things that weren't foreseen. And so executive functioning refers to all of those aspects of being able to plan and organize and basically get your planes up and off the ground and have them land safely.
Got it. Thank you. We are starting to get some parent questions in,
Okay.
which is great. So our first question comes from Nicole. Nicole says, my child has not been identified as ADHD or ADD, but is so unorganized and loses everything. He's 6. How do I help him?
Okay, so the first thing I want us to remember is that there are some skills that, or some deficits that may be more developmentally appropriate than others. So for a 6-year-old is typically going to need a lot of help with organizing themselves, remembering things that they need to take with them to different activities, and they may struggle to keep up with their things. One of the things that I would want to make sure that Nicole is aware of is whether or not, in comparison to other kids his age, it seems that he is more forgetful or he loses things more often than most kids. If that is the case, it might be really important for her to give him reminders and prompts for behaviors rather than expecting him to remember on his own. And that can be frustrating for a parent, especially if they have an older child or they've seen other children who are able to remember everything and get through these routines quickly, and then this particular child struggles. So I want us to just think about individual differences, and it's okay to give prompts and reminders for behaviors that kids struggle with. So if the 6-year-old has difficulty remembering his things, it might be good to set up a chart and have that visible in a place, a visual chart where it just says, remember, backpack packed, and here are the things that go in the backpack, so that he has a checklist. Okay. You can also verbally prompt. So say, please pack your backpack, and give that verbal prompt close to where you want the behavior to occur. So if you are at the front door, that's where the backpack is packed. He gets the prompt, and you wait for follow through. And after he's followed through, you give him some specific praise about how good of a job he's doing listening, following directions, and getting himself organized. And it's really important to give kids that age this type of coaching.
Got it. Thank you. Our next question, a parent says, my son is 12 in 6th grade. Yes. What organizational help should I ask for from his public middle school to include in his IEP? He is dyslexic and has ADHD.
Okay, so for a 6th grader who is 12 years old, also has an IEP and struggles with ADHD and organizational skills, there are some things that you can request. So one of the things that's used to help organize kids when they have IEPs is resource room. So that is a structure by which there's perhaps a special education teacher who is present, who helps kids organize their homework, the responsibilities that they're going to have for the week, helps them to prepare for exams. And so you might ask that he has some time in a resource room setting or one-on-one with a guidance counselor or special education teacher who can help him create a system for getting his homework done. So keeping a chart or a planner that has the organizational tasks he's going to need to accomplish that week, has the homework written down consistently. What's most important about this system is that you also are aware of what the system is and that you are checking on the system on a daily basis to help him stay structured at home and at school. So that parent component is really important. One of the evidence-based approaches for organizational skills training that's done by Dr. Richard Gallagher, who's at the NYU Child Studies Center, recommends that kids have an accordion folder. And so these are the folders that you typically see in an office setting, and within the accordion folder, every subject has its own tab or its own space. And in addition to having that space, you have an organizational chart that talks about what's going to be due in each subject. That might not be something that the school is willing to do or mandated to do in terms of an IEP, but it is a strategy that you as a parent can use when you're thinking about, do I buy a binder? Do I buy multiple notebooks? The accordion folder model is really helpful, and we're teaching kids step by step how to organize their papers and how to know what's homework versus classwork, what needs to be turned in, what needs to be sent home. So it's a process, but I would recommend requesting resource room.
Got it. Thank you. Our next question says, I work with students who have learning differences. I'm currently working with a 13-year-old who uses the following excuse: I can't remember to do these things. How do I respond? Is it a memory thing? Because a lot of teachers at school don't believe this student.
Okay, so the student is saying, I can't remember to do these things.
That's correct.
It's an explanation, but if the student is explaining that they don't remember, then we put a plan into place. And so you may not remember, but when you are prompted, you can follow through after the prompt. And so rather than getting into a dispute or an argument with the student about whether or not they remember, I would focus on moving the student forward and problem solving. So you've told me that you have difficulty remembering to turn in your homework. Here's the way homework works. Every day you're given an assignment, and the following day you're expected to turn it in. what we're going to do is we're going to establish what's called the daily report card system. And so the daily report card system is also the evidence-based measure that's used to organize students and to help them stay on task in the classroom and at home. The way it works, and you can Google this, there are great daily report card systems that are available online and via the web. And so what happens is a student would have 3 different goals. And so if that child is struggling with completing an assignment in class, that would be one goal. If that child is having difficulty with returning homework, that would be a second goal. If that child is having difficulty with following directions or staying on task in class, that's the third goal. We don't want more than 3 goals. Okay. For every class period, a teacher would be monitoring whether or not he met that goal. So that takes a check or a tally, not a smiley face or a frowny face. We just want to see, did the child engage in the behavior? This helps the child to become structured and lets them know that there's the expectation in every class that they follow through. The more they follow through, the more benefits they'll have. Maybe a positive note will go home to a parent every 2 days after he's accomplished those tasks. You also really want to bring the parent in if you can, and say to the parent, this is the system we're going to use at school. We'd like you to sign off on it every night. You don't need to include any negative information on the system. We don't want the kid to start to resent this, okay? Because we want to build this skill for the kid. If he's resentful, he won't use it later. If the kid doesn't engage in the behavior, we just leave the information off. We say there's no check mark, which means it wasn't done. Okay. Parent can interpret that. What we're trying to do is build skills so that when he goes to high school and when he goes to college, he knows structure works for me, okay? So memory issue. If this is indeed a memory issue, you all can do memory testing. When we look at memory, we're also looking at, is a child able to repeat back phrases that they heard in the classroom? Can they remember certain types of patterns? And there's specific neuropsychological evaluation that can measure memory functioning. I think what the child is saying is that for some reason he is not complying, and he's learned that if he says, oh, I can't remember, then he's off the hook. Well, if you can't remember, then you ask for help, okay? So what are the most difficult points in the day when you are forgetful? Or what we need to look at, what is he forgetting? Is it classwork? Is it homework? Is it how to behave? And once we're really specific about what he's forgetting, we can develop an intervention for that.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Our next question says, hi, my question is, how do you answer OTs that state that you can't work on executive functioning skills on its own?
Okay. So remember, executive functioning skills there are many different things that comprise executive functioning skills. When we think of occupational therapy, the philosophy or paradigm around executive functioning for occupational therapists may be different than it is for a clinical psychologist. As a clinical psychologist, when I'm thinking about executive functioning, I will tend to put programs into place that work on more than one skill at a time, but we can also start with one skill and then build upon the other. I think I would need like a little bit more information about maybe a scenario or what happened with a specific OT in terms of what executive functioning skill were you looking to address and how did the occupational therapist respond. Typically, when I've worked with occupational therapists, they are focusing on helping children with fine and gross motor skills and developing those. So children who struggle with attention and ADHD anecdotally happen to have some difficulties with handwriting and fine motor skills. That is not a diagnostic criteria for ADHD. Okay. There may be some issue in terms of executive functioning and being able to inhibit impulses. And so if the impulse is to rush through and to write fast and you have poor graphomotor skills, then it can be difficult to get that handwriting done adequately. So the occupational therapist helps the child with fine motor skills, with their pencil grasp, but they might also work on helping that child to slow down and work through different pieces of getting an assignment done. From a clinical psychologist perspective, we may say, okay, this is a behavioral task that has multiple components. There's a physical component of having the OT work with the hand-eye coordination. There's the component which is about helping the child to be aware that they are rushing through or to understand the differences between neat and writing that is not logical or neat, and then giving some reinforcement for them being able to slow down and correct and write things the way that they should be written. And so I think of that as a multifaceted approach.
Okay.
But if the person writing the question wants to give us more information, I'd be happy to address that differently.
Okay, we'll be on the lookout to see if they respond again.
Thank
Our
you.
next question says, thanks for this program. My son is 15 and has ADHD. His weakest spot is time perception and management. He rebels by refusing to use his learned skills or props like timers and checklists. How can I help?
Okay. When you say that he rebels and refuses to use his checklist, he may be rebelling against the perception that he is still a baby or that he's not able to monitor his own time. And you may say in response, well, you are not monitoring your own time, and it's evident in these ways. With a 15-year-old, one of the things that we have to remember is developmentally, they would like to individuate. They are at a point in their lives where they want to have more autonomy and more control. And so having a parent reminding can be aversive to them, and they can respond with opposition. So I think in these cases, sometimes we have to allow natural consequences to take their course, okay? Rather than getting into a power struggle about him using his skills, which might further reinforce him avoiding the use of skills, and it also serves the function of him getting some additional attention for you. I think it's really important that you're selective about your attention. And so when you catch him, if even by accident, being aware of time, monitoring his use of time, and being able to redirect himself, you will want to engage in some specific praise around those behaviors. You can give reminders and prompts before he starts an assignment or before he goes into an activity. But if you stay on his back about, you have these skills and you should be using a timer, and why aren't you using your planner? He's going to be more likely to rebel. I think it's really important that you shift your attention and you try to catch him when he's appropriate and praise him for being appropriate, and then making the link from him. You got to your practice on time. I'm sure that made your coach really happy, and then you have more time to practice. Love your use of those organizational skills. There are ways to work this in without hammering it on their heads. Okay. I can also understand that as a parent, it's extremely frustrating because you put a lot of work into helping him develop these skills, and it may seem like he's not using them. I think this is a point where developmentally, you're going to get more pushback the more structure you provide. And it's a good opportunity to find ways to help him learn to implement those structures himself.
Okay, thank you. Our next parent asked, what are some general accommodations that parents can ask for their child at school?
Okay, so it really depends on what the presenting problem is. But if we're thinking that a child has difficulty with time management, keeping up with their things, remembering assignments, following through on assignments, one of the primary accommodations that we request sometimes is extra time on tests or in completing an activity. So time and a half is typically what's requested. So if an hour is given, you're requesting at least 90 minutes. Another accommodation could be that directions are presented both orally and in written format. So directions presented in multiple formats is one way that we request accommodations for a kid who might tend to rush through an assignment. Another accommodation is testing in separate locations. For kids who are easily distracted or who find it difficult to attend when there are lots of stimuli in the room, they may need to be tested in a smaller classroom setting or in a room separate from the rest of the class so that they can focus. Another accommodation might be that a kid is given one problem at a time when a test is administered to ensure that they won't rush through. And what that might look like is if you've got a quiz that has 10 questions on it, there might be one question per page, okay? So that the kid is only focusing on what the first thing that they need to respond to before they're worried about racing through the rest of their prompts. In the event that you're not able to get one question per page, it might be that there's a sheet of blank paper that is placed over subsequent questions so that the child is only focusing on one question at a time as they move through an assignment.
Okay, got it. Our next question comes from Leslie. Leslie says, my son is a 5th grader. The teachers at his school are using an organization system that seems to invite struggles with putting things away. For example, file folders within the zippered binder. Can you talk about an easy-to-use system that I could try and propose for him instead?
Okay, so it sounds like the child has separate file folders that are going into a binder, but there's something happening with getting the file folders into a binder.
That's correct.
Okay. I'm going to go back to that accordion folder example, and this is from Richard Gallagher's Organizational Skills Training Manual. It's typically a manual that's used by clinicians in therapy when they're working on organizational skills, but parents can find it, or I'm not promoting the book, but parents can find it. And what they recommend is the accordion folder, and I think it's for that reason. It is bulky, and it will look strange because the kid is walking around with this big office-sized accordion folder. But what it does is it makes it so that for every tab, you know what subject you have. All of your papers are in one place. So papers never just go directly into the book bag or never go directly into the locker. That accordion folder becomes your file cabinet, okay? And that kid knows this file cabinet goes with me everywhere I go. All the papers go inside. Even if they struggle with getting the papers into the appropriate sections, over time, when they're at home and they're working with you, we know all the papers are in one place. And then you can work with them to organize themselves. And so one of the things, whenever we are getting into power struggles with kids, I think that it's good to choose your battles and to give lots of praise for what they are doing well.
Okay.
If he's getting all the pieces of paper in his book bag, great job getting the pieces of papers in your book bag. Next thing we're going to work on is getting them in the folders. He's getting them in the folders. Great job getting them on the folders. Last week we weren't even having papers in the folders. Now they're in the folders. I'm so proud of your progress. So things have to be done in steps.
Okay.
It takes time to integrate these behaviors as part of like a normal routine for a lot of kids who are struggling with executive functioning. We want to give them lots of praise and feedback for the steps they're able to do. And if you notice over time that they're not following through, then that means the program may need to be redesigned. It could be that the kid really could care less about this and there's no level of reinforcement when they do right, so they don't see a point. It could be that we as parents and teachers are not providing as much structure as we need to. And so if a kid is struggling, it may mean that they need more structure, that they need more support.
Okay, got it. Our next question comes from Shelly. Shelly asks, do you have a suggestion on how to help with processing speed?
Okay, processing speed. Typically, when we are measuring processing speed, we know it's that a kid is struggling with it if their performance in timed test or when they're tested under pressure is worse than when they're tested without pressure. If you're interested in increasing your child's processing speed, one of the things you can do is just start to use a timer to help them get through basic activities. So sometimes kids struggle with like a concept of time when they have deficits in executive functioning. And so what we do is we basically make it like a game. And so one of the things that we might do if it's a homework task is we can say you've got 10 problems. I want to see if you can neatly, completely, and correctly move through a problem in 3 minutes or 5 minutes. And you set the timer on your phone or on the kitchen stove, or you have a regular kitchen timer. Set the timer for 5 minutes and say, go. That kid, it's kind of like a game for the kid, and you're narrating the whole time. Oh, I love the way you're getting started right away. You're really focused. Great job working. At the end of the timer, there's praise. You made it through that problem in 5 minutes. Or if they made it through less than 5 minutes, wow, you beat the timer and you did so in a way that was neat, complete, and correct. If the kid struggled with 5 minutes, you could say, hey, good try. It looks like 5 minutes was too short. Let's try 7. Okay? So in order to work on processing speed, you need to kind of make these things like into kind of like a fun game, but you do it around a structure that happens regularly, like a homework assignment or a routine task like washing the dishes or getting teeth brushed or making the bed.
Got it. We do have a follow-up comment to our question about occupational therapists.
Yes.
So the comment says, I was working on an overall situational intelligence, time management, and planning ahead. This is a school for boys with behavioral and emotional issues. The OT made it seem like it would be a waste of time since their systems are not ready for that. Since they get upset, there is a total disconnect between the part of the brain and the emotional regulation, and they have executive functioning skills.
Okay, so we build those connections. And the way we build connections between emotion regulation and executive functioning skills is to put plans into place that provide consistency, that provide structure, and high levels of reinforcement. Okay? And while the reinforcement can also be reinforcement of emotion regulation skills. So, great job getting through that assignment. I love how you stayed calm when things were frustrating. It's both things. It's that structure and it's the emotion regulation. We praise both. We structure both. When we're working on creating organizational systems or daily report card systems that kids respond to, it doesn't just have to be focused on an executive functioning skill, like staying organized or planning ahead. You can also incorporate an emotion regulation skill, staying calm when frustrated, raise hand to ask for help. Those things can be integrated, okay? And so we really want to make sure that if the kid experiences a deficit, we still establish a program to address it. It doesn't mean that the kid will never be able to accomplish the skill. It's really important for us to challenge kids. And I'm not saying to throw everything with them, but in stepwise progression to challenge them so that they can learn to develop these coping skills. So if your school is for boys who tend to struggle with emotion regulation and behavioral issues, it would be a good idea to have some organizational tasks on the chart as well as to have an emotion regulation task. And teachers all day long are praising positive emotion regulation skills and praising organizational skills. It can happen at the same time. Thank you for the clarification.
That was super helpful. Thank you, Kristen. Our next question comes from Lisa. Lisa says, my son is a 16-year-old sophomore, with ADHD. However, homework that should take 2 hours takes about 4 to 5. He tends to jump back and forth on his laptop between homework and YouTube. What can I do to help?
Okay, so there's basically no way for you all to cut the YouTubes off the computers. They're going to be there. One of the things that I would do is have a conversation about your concerns with how long it takes for homework because he's distracted. And I'd ask him for his perspective and what he thinks it would take to make things get better. And then I'd offer a suggestion. One of the suggestions that I'd offer is that he work solely on one assignment. And when he has completed that assignment, he takes a 5 to 10 minute YouTube break. You give him a prompt and reminder when that time is ending. And then he moves into the next homework assignment. And then he takes a 5 or 10 minute YouTube break. Or you say, I'm going to give you an hour or 2 hours to knock out this homework. During that time, the only browser that can be up is the My eClass, whatever classroom browser he needs. Or the computer is closed, okay? After you power through that homework, you can have your YouTube break for 30 to 40 minutes, and I'll review the homework, and then we'll meet back up in 30 or 40 minutes. YouTube is the reinforcer. Use it to your advantage. Homework is not reinforcing, okay? Nobody's intrinsically motivated. Most people are not intrinsically motivated to do homework unless they're good and fast at it, okay? Or unless they're really excited about the subject. YouTube is very reinforcing for most kids. And so we kind of have to get on board and figure out ways to use it to our advantage.
Got it. Thank you. Our next question comes from Tara. Tara says, do you happen to have any resources that I can give my grown son's university academic advisor who knows very little about diagnosed dyslexia or my son's intense struggle with organization and memory?
Okay. So what I will tell you is an organization that I used to work for in New York has an amazing website with tons of resources, as well as the understood.org website. The Child Mind Institute is a nonprofit organization that provides treatment as well as a wealth of resources on a number of different topics, ranging from ADHD to executive functioning skills to how to get the most out of intervention. I would direct you to their website, which is childmind.org. I would also refer you to the understood.org website. It may be that you can send the academic advisor some links to some articles on dyslexia and reading disabilities, giving them some more information about the nature of those disabilities and what's or those differences, and what's helpful in terms of structure. I would check out understood.org and childmind.org for resources. The American Academy of Pediatrics also provides great resources on their website.
Got it. Thank you. And our last question comes from Chris. Chris says, my 7th grader does his homework but forgets to turn it in. How can I help?
Ugh. So that's the worst. You always spend all night getting his homework done, and then he doesn't turn it in, and then he doesn't get the grade for it, and then his grades are low because he hasn't turned it in. All right. One of the things that I would do as a parent is I would reach out to the teacher and ask for a prompt, that the teacher give him a prompt. Most teachers will say he's in 7th grade, he should know how to turn in his homework. Maybe a teenager who doesn't struggle with executive functioning skills doesn't need to prompt to turn in his homework, but this child needs a prompt. I'd ask teachers to prompt him. I'd also try to get him to set an alarm on his phone. And I don't know if they're allowed to have the phones in the classroom setting, but with the school's permission, I'd ask that an alarm was set on the phone that prompts him for submitting homework. Once he is prompted to submit the homework and he submits it, he sends a text message to you. Done. Okay? This is totally off the fly, and I'm just trying to think of creative ways to get him to do it. The more he is able to turn in his homework and he's sending you those done text messages, I would find some way to reinforce him at home for remembering to turn it in. So I'd say, okay, you get your homework turned in 3 out of 5 days this week, you get to choose the dinner. You get your homework turned in 4 out of 5 days this week, you get to get maybe a fast food treat. 5 out of 5 days, you get to pick the family outing. There are different ways to reinforce kids to get them to do the things that we need them to do over time. This is extremely frustrating, and I think it happens to a lot of kids and a lot of parents where you put in the work, but a kid forgets to turn the work in. I think it is fine to ask teachers to prompt for the behavior because we know that the child is experiencing a deficit, and it's not fair to just say, well, he's in 7th grade, he should know. If he knew, he would do better. So it's not about knowing, it's about that second step, which is actually following through and getting it done.
Got it. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for today's chat. I do want to thank everyone for joining us, and thank you, Dr. Kristin Carothers, for your time. I just want to remind everyone that you can find all of our archived chats at u.org/calendar. And if you have a question that we unfortunately were not able to get to today, feel free to join the community at u.org/community. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.